about 10 days ago with bad gastroenteritis.
Oh,
and
no.
when I get fevers, ever since I was a kid, I just get these nasty. But I am full swing right now.
Awesome.
And thank you very much for attending. Glad you got seated. I heard you were sold out. Okay, so what this is it's just a whirlwind tour through digital health, health tech innovation, and it's really meant to just stimulate some interest and questions and to let you know that we have a lot of activity going on campus. And I'd be happy to be a bit of an air traffic controller for you, a navigator, or even just a sounding board. So let's just jump right in. How's that sound? Before I start, could I find out, is everyone here medical, or are there other professional students in here as well? Graduate students?
Medical.
All med? Okay. First year and second year?
Mm-hmm.
First year. Let's just go around because it's a small group. What's your background? What's your undergrad in? And don't talk with your mouth.
Sure, one second.
Just kidding.
So my name's Nick. I went to Penn for undergrad. I graduated in 2014, and I had a degree in biology, but I was in the honors research program doing a lot of basic science research. But then after I graduated, I was working at NASA and kind of transitioned to more doing data science work. So I did a data science boot camp about a year ago and did some coding, and then school started. So
Great.
trying to transition more into doing that.
Cool. Okay.
Well, my name is Nee. I went to undergrad at Harvard, studied stem cell bio and minor in computer science, did a few projects here and there, and I'm very interested in health technology. And glad to be here with you guys and eat something.
My name is April. I'm a second year medical student. I graduated Princeton with a computer science degree and took a gap year. So I actually worked at the breast care center with Laura Esserman on one of her kind of more, like, I guess, futuristic ideas about interfacing with the EHR and how can we get data in the structured way to and from it.
Were you on the OneSource project?
Correct.
We're trying to build Ortho OneSource.
I saw the your
have
slides and I was like, what's going on? Anyway.
Great.
My name is Parth. I'm also a second year med student. I graduated from Berkeley with a major in biology and a minor in bioengineering. As for health tech, I haven't done too much of more biology and microbiology research and a little bit of like aortic stuff. But I have a huge fascination in VR and 3D printing, so I'm doing a lot of stuff with like med ed and VR, so that's kind of my extent with like health technology in the med ed setting.
You said 3D printing was you were telling me about when you were looking for ortho 3D printing.
Yes, and also VR. We have two initiatives, 3D printing and VR, so don't let me forget. I didn't put much of that in here, but at the end, I hope there's enough time to just answer questions, and I mean, I'll see you next week. And, yeah.
My name's Rashid. I'm a second year med student. I went to Duke for undergrad, where I studied biomedical engineering, and I kind of focused more on injury orthopedic biomechanics.
Wow.
And I haven't done anything related to that since I graduated back in 2015, but it was awesome. I loved it, and curious to see where the future takes me.
Fantastic.
I'm excited to be here.
This is such a great, so talented. Oh, we've got one more in the background.
So my name is Simon. I'm a second year medical student. I went to Johns Hopkins to study biomedical engineering and applied mathematics. My involvement in health tech was with medical devices. I built a few medical devices in undergrad. Luckily, sadly, I couldn't continue that work, so I'm trying to come back with health tech in med school and seeing my interest in working with people who are interested in devices.
Fantastic. Well, I've had a real fun time working with me and Simon and Andrew, and they know that I'm very much about supporting you in being able to explore both parts of yourselves, the frontline clinician, also an innovator, entrepreneur. So I'm hoping we can figure out a way to help you become that intersection person. Some people know right away they belong in industry or they belong wherever, but I want to challenge you to explore the idea of having a foot in each, because one thing informs the other. Your frontline work will inform your innovation and vice versa. Okay, let's jump in. That's an info slide. How many were at the mixer?
I don't know if I'm getting anything.
Oh, you got nothing? Did it pop out?
Maybe extended versus
This thing's really heavy, so it might have just hung down too far. Let's just start it again.
Tissues and white if it's not
Let's take some weight off of it.
You know, it's receiving something.
Yeah.
This is super heavy. It was hanging half out when I looked down. Just one tape. Okay, go.
Good, yay, it worked!
Nice one.
A very empathetic doctor, though. Okay, great. Oh, that was not very nice. Let's see. We're really gonna start this here soon. Good?
Yep, we're good.
Okay. I don't know how many were at the Health Tech Mixer. Some of the slides might be familiar, but this is my definition of healthcare. We can turn the lights down if that's okay with you. And it's really because we have a system that's really broken, but we still have to function in it. And so as you can see, it's really hard to navigate, and we also know that it's moving, so it's seismically shifting beneath our feet right now. So this is just sort of a synopsis of where we are with healthcare. And it's in great transition. So I'm going to tell you things that were true before the election. Now, all of these are up in the air, but there are some things I think we're not going back on, regardless of which party wins which piece of it. So I will just say that we are making a big shift from volume to value-based care. We're not all the way there. We don't have systems to measure the metrics, et cetera, but it's been so raised as a profile that I don't think we're going to go backwards on that. We might not achieve it the way it was written in the initial document. Provider-focused to patient-focused care, that's a big shift that's happening, and I think you're probably aware of that even in yourselves and watching your parents take more ownership over the decision-making processes and the information processes. And then moving more towards team-based care, which we should be all along, but we've been a very sort of king of the mountain solo type specialty type service. And then moving towards more aggregated systems, and part of that's through the ACO model, it's being mandated, and part of it is sort of survival of the business of healthcare. You see more systems aggregating, you see more Stanford ads in San Francisco, et cetera. We're also moving to more hyper-distributed care, so care way outside the building. And that's very exciting to me because I think, first of all, we have the ability to understand what's happening to people in their real lives and also to support them in their real lives. And I think these are all very interesting opportunities for us. And then connecting care all the way across the continuum. Right now, the ambulance information in any kind of data flow doesn't intersect with the hospital data. And that data doesn't intersect with the nursing home data, which doesn't intersect with the private practice doctor's data. So it's very fragmented, but we're getting more and more continuous type models set up. And there are more data sources now than there ever were. And we have lots of very exciting new solutions coming into healthcare, including the Internet of Things concept, interoperability, et cetera. Then the whole initiative around precision medicine, intersecting disparate data streams, including genomic with phenomic, to understand you as an individual better. And there is also another big variable in all of this, which is the patient is changing dramatically. We now have the empowered patient, excuse me. And this is a really important concept, and it's not homogeneous. So you have to understand each patient as they come in, where they are on the spectrum of this. But patients really are changing, and I think we should figure out how to take advantage of that. It's a reflection of the fact the world around them, they're used to getting information on demand now. So they're expecting that in healthcare. They're also expecting answers on demand from you. So real-time turnaround in terms of them reaching out to you as a provider. They get a lot of information. They can't always contextualize it. So sometimes they're actually becoming overwhelmed in ways that we haven't seen before. But they are more engaged and they are more activated, and both of those characteristics in studies transfer to better outcomes. So I think that's a really important concept. And I think that instead of spending more time on that, just think over and over about this idea of an engaged, activated patient and how that relates to outcomes. And we need more data on that, but that's what we've seen so far. There is a big movement happening of the digitization of healthcare, and we've seen it march across through other industries. We're quite far behind a lot of these industries, but we're able to borrow some of the technologies. So from the fintech movement, we're looking at privacy security issues that they've worked out. We do know there's a general thought in finance where we've traded away privacy for convenience or security for convenience. People aren't quite there with healthcare yet, although generationally it's a little bit different from one age group to the next. But we're also looking at digitization of healthcare in several different ways. So in the hospital and the clinic, you see it in the electronic record, you see it in data management, analytics, informatics fields, all the privacy security issues. We're looking more and more at interoperability. There's a part in here we'll get to on that. But outside of that is the telehealth, the real life monitoring, and then this is creating new IT infrastructure demands and also new roles. The roles in healthcare are shifting dramatically. So people always say, well, what is digital health or health information technology? And to be honest, it spans, in our definition, everything from nanosensors clear over to big data analytics and all the hardware and software in between. So starting back at the medical devices, these you see in the hospital everywhere, but an interesting shift is happening in that the information has always just been trapped in the device. So even the anesthesiologist in the ICU, all that data they're collecting doesn't naturally stream in or get filtered and put into the EHR and intersected. So what's happening now is a lot of the device companies are figuring out ways to actually push the information out of the machine into a meaningful environment, whatever that might be. So these machines are changing dramatically. And we also have all of these things that have surfaced. Now, these are a lot of consumer wearables, and the problem is they're not well validated. They're definitely not to medical grade, but a lot of them aren't even validated against each other. There's tremendous variability. So we don't know how to trust the data from these things. But we do know that some patients wearing it serially, it's good enough for them to make judgments about their own health, their own wellness. So we do think that they're encouraging, and they've gotten people engaged. The problem is in about 6 months, over half of these are in the drawer, and over half of the healthcare apps are no longer used. So it's important to know that these things are shiny objects, and for some people who just are naturally engaging with all these things, they'll keep wearing it. We've got to figure out a better way to get people to have a longer term relationship with the devices that we think could be helpful to them. Then we've got this crossover stuff in the middle, where we've got some consumer wearables, but they're actually bumping up against, so here's a scale, but it's being validated in clinical studies so that we're starting to use these consumer grade intersecting with medical grade diagnostics, point of care diagnostics, or I actually call them point of life diagnostics, because you can move away from the care setting and get really tremendous information now. So we're getting very exciting information on the patient specifically, and not just waiting for them to be in our own environment. Then the other thing is the data management side, which isn't as glamorous, but is incredibly important. And some of the phrases you've heard a lot about, analytics, edge analytics, where you can get information on the device, run algorithms right there, push information right back to the patient to give them an actionable step. So tremendous power coming out of other industries, risk prediction modeling, and we've talked a little bit, I think you had earlier talk on a little bit on informatics, how you can leverage all this data. If done well, it's going to be powerful in ways that we've not been able to experience in healthcare yet, and we're just getting a sense of that. So we say the strategy for digital health goes all the way from wireless to hardware, software, and because it's in the cloud, we say it's hardware, software, nowhere and everywhere. So it's a very, very broad term. When we talk about the idea of digitizing healthcare, it's really fascinating. You can start imagining ways of functioning in healthcare that we've never had before. This whole idea of real-time data driving decision support. Right now, we might look things up in Hippocrates, or we might look up algorithms, or we might even get some algorithmic information in the EHR, but it's fairly limited right now, and it's not close to being adaptive or learning or adjusting to the patient over time, etc. So the capabilities are really exciting. So open your minds up, because you're going to be the ones who are actually going to be affecting those changes and living them, and your patients will be benefiting from them. But this is right around the bend, 2018, and Gartner predicted that almost 10% of developed countries will have these kinds of real-time health system capabilities at the bedside. We also know that we're moving into this era called precision medicine, and it's still a ways from being realized across conditions. You certainly hear about it a lot in cancer, some rare diseases, some conditions where the drug is really, really toxic and it's effective in a really small population, and you want to make sure it's going to work on that person. Or drugs that have to be metabolized by the cytochrome P450 pathway, and a person may genetically have a dysfunction there, and it's important to know those things. But what's exciting is if we can build out the knowledge network, where we take basic clinical, social, behavioral sciences, and we enable them with omics and intersect them with digital health information, we can have a tremendous ability to treat populations better, but treat individuals better as well. Instead of just applying population data to a person, we're off quite a bit. So this is an example of intersecting disparate data streams in a way that we haven't done in the past. This is a project called MS BioScreen, UCSF project. It's in the Neurosciences building, the Sandler building. It was started by Pierre-Antoine Gouraud, but Riley Beauvais, she's a neurologist, and she's taken over the project for Pierre. He does half-time France and half-time here. So what they did was it's the largest data set of MS patients really in the country, and they had deep, deep data. So across functional testing, across genomics, across pharmacologics, they even have phenomenal brain imaging. And what they didn't have is the ability to intersect it into a meaningful way. It was all in the research database. So the researchers would mine it, ask a question, put a few things together, write a paper. The clinician and the patient, this never entered their conversation. And it's so powerful. So what they did is they created a platform with beautiful dashboards to intersect the data, and you can call it up in different ways. And you can see the selection criteria up here. And basically what it starts allowing you to do is to look at that individual against themselves over time, or against a large reference data set, or against other people with similar functional criteria, and then give them a sense of, might they respond to this drug? How did the other patients respond to the drug? Because this is a very relapsing, remitting condition and very hard to predict. So this becomes a really powerful tool for patients, clinicians, and of course for the researchers. This is another example of how disparate data streams in our own hospitals had never really come together before. So this is an example of an ICU project. I'm showing you these because you can also ask me later, how do you contact that person? Because they're all always building out their teams. So this one is in the ICU. Mike Gropper heads this up. And this is a collaboration with Johns Hopkins. And they are pulling together vitals. Just imagine, this hasn't happened before. Vitals, labs, patient subjective information, physical exam, nursing report, imaging, critical data that only really ever came together in the intern's head for about 5 minutes right before they presented. Other than that, that data does not come together, or is it acted on by algorithms or anything. So now this is a platform where that can happen, and they're going after 6 of the biggest, most serious complications in the ICU. So deep vein thrombosis, Lyme sepsis, pneumonia, etc. And they're actually showing that they can pick up on early signs of these and prevent them. This is a very exciting project called Emerge. Anyway, it shows the power of data when it's used well and combining disparate streams of it. So this is just going to switch over into the businesses a little bit, because I want you to know that this is a very exciting area that's been building rapidly, and we're a bit in the hub of it. So you can see that we're the busiest center still by far, where you're sitting in medical school. Other areas are starting to become hotspots, but we're way outstripping the other areas still. But what we're also doing is starting to collaborate with them more as they start to develop their own pools of expertise. This just shows that there's also a lot of activity going on around the world. I spend a lot of time advising groups in Melbourne, because this is a big hotspot for digital health down here. But just to let you know, it's happening everywhere. People are innovating like crazy, even in low resource settings, and we're able to take some of their knowledge they've developed and reverse innovate it back into our world. So this also is just to show you some of the hot areas. Now mind you, this is all referenced off investment, so that's only one metric for what's hot and what's not, but it's certainly one that's driving certain fields. So big data analytics really surfaced when a couple of years ago that would have said wearables. So these things change year to year. This is from a group called Startup Health, which is a really great website. It's an incubator in New York City. Use it as a reference. They have fantastic materials. I work with them, and they have always been very good at educating everybody outside of their own organization. So these are just examples of ways that digital health or health technology is being utilized. And this just shows that we're continuing to gain. There was a little dip in 2015. So a huge leap in 2014 when the investments went to about 7 billion. A little dip here, and then up to 8 billion, and we're on track to exceed that this year. This is really about, the dots are deal count, the dollars are in the bars. But it just shows you that there's still tremendous excitement about it, even though there's starting to be some hesitation. This shows you Series C, which is the latest investment, and showing how that's dropping off a bit. And what that means is companies are getting so far along, and then people get nervous about them. And there are some reasons for that, and we'll talk about that in just a second. This is the Gartner Hype Cycle. Have you guys seen this graph several times before in the past? Well, when you're looking at new innovations, there's an innovation trigger, then there's a peak, so it gets announced, virtual reality, and then there's this peak of inflated expectations, and then you go through this trough of disillusionment, up the slope of enlightenment, and the plateau of productivity. And what I think is interesting about this is looking at where certain technologies are. Like you're just seeing VR. So VR in healthcare is very exciting. We've got projects, our colleagues are working on. It's still very impractical. And so but it made it so far. So it's coming up, and we're learning, everybody in the beginning was gonna jump in, and now it's just the serious people are gonna take it from there. So you see this 3D printing, enterprise 3D printing. So we're working on 3D printing on the front lines of healthcare now. And it's a much more mature technology than when it was way over here and just super exciting, and we were printing toys and things. So this is a very interesting concept to think about and look at where are the technologies in their maturation where you might want to pull them into healthcare. But there's some questions about how all of this is doing. Like, is there information saying that all this health technology is really meaningful? I mean, the digital health technology. And we know that there's some real hesitations now, or some discouragements about the EHR. It's massively expensive. There's some other problems in that it takes 13 years to recoup your costs. You lose a ton of money when you bring it in and implement it. And it wasn't well designed from the user standpoint, the provider. We're now the data entry clerks. And so the problem is, it's driving actually a lot of docs out of healthcare. So there's a huge shortage anticipated. Now, as people in your age range who grew up with the keyboard, and this is the way you communicate, I think it'll be different, and hopefully we will have forced modifications on the user experience enough that it won't be so horrible for you as when we started with it. But anyway, this is just showing some of the challenges that we're facing. The other is that we're tired of these point solutions coming at us. An app is not a company, nor is it an end-to-end solution for any journey in healthcare. So this idea of bringing us point solutions where you might have the inventory, or your system might dial the rep. But if we want to book a surgical case, we have got to get all the way from triaging whether the patient needs surgery, to which surgery, to the right implants, to connecting to the images, making sure everything's there in the OR and that it's clean. And when I open that tray, I've got everything I need. So all of those steps, and then billing for it afterwards, and then following the patient to their recovery. That's an end-to-end journey. And so we're looking more and more at integrated solutions instead of point solutions. And then we're seeing in some places, flattening of some investment, but one of the telltale signs is that a lot of startups can't get past pilots. So they get in a pilot, they get an initial pilot, but they might get 2 or 3 at small hospitals, but they can't turn into a paying customer. And there's some problems why, and I'll tell you that in just a minute. So this is just saying that we know there's potential, but we're starting to see a lot of health tech companies sort of die off in what they call the valley of death. So what I've done is put together this idea about how do we get from the promise to the power of digital health or health technology in healthcare. So one of the first things I think is know your audience. And so from the very, very beginning, you will understand a problem from your side of it. You may not understand it from the user side. It might be the patient, the payer, the investor, the family member. Who else is in the equation? So know your audience means make sure you understand everyone affected by it and everyone affecting it. And then we'll talk a little bit more about that, then what else goes into know your audience. The next is evaluation. We need quite a bit more of that, interoperability and partnering. So let's talk for a second about know your audience. So this is where design thinking comes in. Everyone in the room heard of design thinking? Yeah, okay. And so we'll actually have a design session in this lecture series, and it's going to be interactive, and they'll go through principles of it, and then you actually get to deploy those principles. But it's something that we need to use more in healthcare, even in how we interview patients. And it's a field called qualitative research. We're starting to understand how it's so powerful alongside of qualitative research. So it's a very interesting thing to dive into. But the other piece of this is behavioral sciences. So I call the behavioral scientists the new heroes of healthcare, because like I said, we can give everyone all the information, we can tell them what it means, but we may not be able to incentivize them to make the right choices, because we frankly may not understand what motivates them. We don't know what their drivers are, or we don't know how to reinforce them at the right moment. So behavioral science is very powerful, and it's showing up a lot in health technology. And then this whole idea of being able to understand a person's preferences. And finally, frontline innovation. That's a piece of know your audience, and we're going to talk about that more, but that means the people who are actually face the problems or sit in the problems every day need to be involved in the equation of innovation, and that will be you guys. However, we also need a whole lot of partners. So if we get an idea from the front lines of healthcare, it's going to take design, management, business, grants, and all of these things that we may or may not have expertise in on a healthcare campus. So we've got to make sure that we understand that we've got to reach out and get those components and partner with people. But what's really important about this graph is that it's showing you that from the minute you step to the whiteboard with an idea, that's when your evaluation plan starts. And you do evaluation all the way across the arc of development, all the way to deployment, and then you monitor afterwards. So this is an important piece that I think has been missing from things being developed on the outside. And that's why we play such a critical role in this. So this is what I call frontline innovation. And you experience the pain points as a provider, or you witness them in your patients. And then you have to sit there and think about, well, does it fit into the workflow, this thing I'm imagining, or do I also need to disrupt the workflow? Then you know you have to use it yourself, so you really, really care about it, and you're going to test it all the way along. And then you're going to monitor it after you put it in place as well. So frontline innovators come with some very unique strengths, and we need to partner with the outside tech companies more. This is just to show you that at UCSF, there's a lot of support for frontline innovation here. It's still not easy, but there's a tremendous support here on campus, and we're building out more and more capacity for it. And what I mean it's not easy is that we're here doing a job, a primary job, taking care of people, but we have an idea, we want to invent something. But it's not really research yet, and it's not really protected time, and we don't really have any funding for it, so we dabble in it for a while. And then we have trouble pulling in all the other pieces we need, the business model, for instance. So we're trying to build out and empower frontline innovators here better. So QB3 is an incubator, so if you got your technology up, you'll disclose it, first of all, to the tech transfer office. Don't talk to outside companies until you've disclosed it, or have a non-proprietary deck to talk to them about it. If you ever get approached by someone, or you have an idea that you want to partner with someone, let me know and I'll help guide you on that. An important point is students who are paying their own way here, as long as you're not using UCSF resources for your idea, you own your idea, you can build it in your garage. If you want to use UCSF resources and expertise, then all of a sudden you become co-developing it with us, which is actually, it sounds, wow, why would you give that away? But on the other hand, you'll move a lot faster with the domain expertise and the massive infrastructure we have, even for filing patents. But if you're not clear about it, just ask me. So we've got QB3, which is an incubator. So if you launched your technology, licensed it out of the university, became an LLC or company, you'd be able to enter that. Center for Digital Health Innovation, I'll talk about in a minute. That supports you internally. And then the ITA has a Center for Entrepreneurship, and that's a nice website to follow. They have a lot of activities, speakers and events. And then there are a lot of online resources, and this is a group called Caring Wisely, and they do a lot of health quality innovation. So great resources, and on the informatics side, you might know Atul Butte already, but Institute for Computational Health Sciences, we've had a ton of informatics on campus for a long time. They're starting to coalesce, but this is a really powerful group, and they're also working across the state of California, et cetera. So there are a lot of resources here for whatever you want to do. The Center for Digital Health Innovation was really set up to help support more frontline innovation and helping with innovation, validation, integration, and education. And the reason is that we were finding things were so poorly validated on the outside that we wanted to help with that. We also wanted to help the internal people understand this innovation pathway better. You get an idea, we will understand the problem better if it's one that we're familiar with. And we do all of these steps along the way. We've had to learn some of these. So we brought in Stephen Blank and his Lean Launchpad method, and I think this campus was the first one to use his technology for life and health sciences. But we bring in all these types of efforts for innovation, but the pathway is still the same. You've got to go through these steps to get it to go. So we have an accelerator. So if your idea is inside, you can apply to the Catalyst Innovator. We look for novel and scalable technologies that we think will launch. And it's an innovator where you get some funding, but most importantly, there's a panel of 200 outside advisors that are very senior in their industries, and they actually jump on your team and help you. You can, as students, go be interns in this, and you really learn a lot about arc of development and innovation by doing that. An example is a person comes in super smart, like Dr. Subak. She knows her space really well as an OB-GYN surgeon. She developed an app that was supporting women who had urinary incontinence. Took it out of a little notebook, made it something super simple and almost invisible in their lives, but she didn't know anything about business and how to turn this into something that could scale. So we got her business experts. These are actually both MDs. He's MD, PhD. He's an MD, MBA, and he's a venture capitalist. And this is David Shaywitz. You should look him up right away because he's a voice in digital health. So anyway, got her around the bend. She built an app and was able to launch it. And then these are other examples of things that were built here and advised on mostly through the Catalyst project. And so if you see something along the way that you want to jump in, let me know. Look up Adam Ghazali also. His lab is phenomenal, the Neuroscape lab. And we may have a chance to tour that towards the end. I'm going to scoot along a little bit. These are apps we've been building in PD Ortho to help with patient navigation. We have for scoliosis surgery, we have for hip surgery, and we're just starting on the fracture one. This is one I was just going to show you. This person had a lot of expertise in neurosciences, and she wanted to work on an app for her adolescent schizophrenic patients. Can you imagine a harder group to engage in anything? And she did a beautiful app, gave it to them, and they said, great, we would never use it. And at that moment, she was in the Catalyst program. At that moment, we realized we need to understand better what it is they will use and what they want. So she went through a whole design process with IDEO. And the patients actually ended up going down to IDEO for their interviews. It was a really enlightening process. She's now launched this and ported it over to depression. It's also very successful in that. And she's actually launched herself to Verily. So that's Danielle Schlosser. She's a very cool person. She may jump in, but here's how different the app looked after the design process. Scoot along here. Healthy Heart I want you to know about because this is a group it's like the digital version of Framingham, and they've really disrupted clinical trials, and they've now got a platform called Eureka that they're using in other disease states. So it's also very important to know that there was just a paucity of evaluation. There's just so lacking evidence and effectiveness data in care and cost. So that's why we must be in this game, and we must evaluate all the way across the arc of development. And the reason is because when you're trying to get funding or you want to know if it's going to work and it's going to be sustainable, it's got to be proven. both in cost, we can't add more cost to the healthcare system, and in effectiveness. So we do a lot of validation work here in the CDHI, but also we validate down at the Orthopedic Institute a lot of sensors and wearables. And if that kind of work is interesting to you, we have capabilities to get you involved there. We also validate outside technology. So Health Loop was built on the outside, we've brought it into ortho, we help with some co-development, and we've been validating it in our arthroplasty and sports patients. And then this idea that we need the data to intersect drives these aggregating platforms. You've probably heard of some of these companies, but we still had a problem with them not intersecting well with the EHR. So even though we feel like we're on the front of the wave here, the truth is we actually usually are overwhelmed by the amount of data because it's not intersecting well. So this is something I call the panome. All these different data sources, the genome, the phenome, the microbiome, the proteome, the genome, and way out here what I now call the phonome, because we're gathering consumer analytics and intersecting patients' patterns with all of these other things. So we really feel like this. We feel like we're in front of this massive wave of data really instead of riding it. When we want to get, if we want to get beyond that, we've got to get the data to be actionable information. So we've got to contextualize it and make it accessible at the right time, and that involves a lot of the things you started exploring in data science. And that's where I think the new power is going to be in healthcare. So that's another one of the promise to power things. Very quickly, we had these operating systems. These things were running in our hospital, never meant to connect to each other. So before we ever even got to the interoperability idea with all these disparate data streams, we were still trying to build and brute force bridges between all these things, and every other hospital is doing the same exercise. So we thought, okay, well, wait a minute. Now we're getting all this data in from outside the clinical system. We can't get it to intersect with the clinical system, and the inside the clinical system doesn't really intersect with the whole clinical world here. So it was just a big mess, even though we think we're good at bridges in California or in San Francisco. And then we started reading about interoperability gaps, and billions of dollars are lost for every interoperability gap that's identified. So we really went after this, and we went after it in a big way with a partner, which is another part of this promise to power spectrum. And this was a deal that I put together between UCSF and Cisco to build a comprehensive healthcare interoperability platform. And so this is actually underway, and it's going to be launched in a beta type soon here. So digital health really, if we do it right, it's not just the fourth kid on the block. It's not device diagnostics, therapeutics, and digital health. It's going to be the great communicator between all of these things if we get this list right. And the last thing on the list is just individualization. And a good example is our new hospital. By the time you get to your room, you've registered, the EHR has sent a signal up to your interactive media wall, your name is there, your team is populated on there, and your educational modules are set up based on your diagnosis. So that's the individualized portion of this that gets people more engaged. And also the more interactive it is, the more power they feel in the system. And then of course we're using, quite simply, these great technologies now that will port the grandparents in, and we'll port the doctor in from one campus to another. So this whole ability for us to now extend our reach. So you're entering a world where some of this is here and some isn't. You get to fill in the gaps, only limited by imagination, hopefully. So you can sit at a terminal and get information from all these disparate data streams. You could also, as a patient, sit way outside and communicate with your doctor who has access to those things. Ideally, all of us will be able to do it from anywhere, and then we'll also be able to leverage the brain trust from experts all around the world. And this is a space where virtual tumor board fits in. So the goal for me to work in all of this is to get to this concept that I coined a couple years ago called informed health. And we lead informed lives. You just pick up your phone if you're going to book something or buy something or whatever. You get the right information at the right moment to make the right decision. We don't have that in healthcare. And we really, really should be functioning like that. And I want you guys to have an intolerance for uninformed health. So when you're there for a moment, challenge yourself of what information could I get at this moment that would optimize my decision or optimize my patient's decision and hopefully lead to the best outcome. Just challenge yourself, what other information do I need right now? And how would I get it there? Because then that's your innovation. Okay, we'll let's stop there and see if you have some questions that we can, I'm happy to spend a little time or make sure that you have my contact info.